Hey guys, Ash here from C4E Tech, and Realme just launched the GT Neo 3T. Well, that might be a mouthful. Now, there are some things they've done really well with this phone and some things, well, we are going to talk about all that since I've been using this phone for a week. So what's good, what's not, and everything in between, let's cover in today's video. So if you do end up liking what you see, thumbs up, subscribe, you know what to do. Let's get started. Now, T devices are usually upgrades from what's in the market already. But here this time, it really isn't. Now let's get that clear off the bat. The Neo 3T is not an upgrade on the Neo 3. In fact, what it is a follow-up to the Neo 2. Now why I say that is because there are a lot of similarities between this phone and the GT Neo 2. For example, the Neo 3 had a glass back, but this one doesn't. You know what other phone didn't have a glass back? The Neo 2. Again, the GT Neo 3 had a 6.7-inch display with a center hole punch, whereas this one has a 6.62-inch with a hole punch to the side. You know what other phone had this exact setup? The GT Neo 2. I can keep going on and on, but for all intents and purposes, this is the GT Neo 2 with a few changes. Now, what are those changes? How have those changes panned out? We'll get to it. Now, for starters, this phone is slightly lighter than the Neo 2, but it is heavier than the Neo 3. That said, the build itself is nice. While this is plastic, it's got a nice finish to it, and you can see this checkered pattern to the back depending on how it catches light. Now this is the drifting white. Dash yellow looks killer in my humble opinion, but if you want something more subtle, something more muted, then shade black is an option. It doesn't have that checkered pattern for it. It's also a nice touch that the camera array has that racing flat finish in it too. But overall, the in-hand feel, despite the sides and the back being plastic, it's still quite nice. It's pretty comfortable to use. As far as placements go, it's typical Realme. You've got the power key to the right, you've got the secondary noise cancelling microphone up top, the volume keys reside to the left, and to the bottom we've got the SIM tray. This can take 2 SIMs. There is no support for micro SD. For what it's worth, Realme does support a lot of 5G bands. Then we've got a primary microphone and speaker with the USB Type-C port sandwiched in between. Talking about speaker, up top, the earpiece, that also doubles as a speaker, and the audio output, it's pretty similar to what we've gotten with the GT Neo 3 and even the GT Neo 2. It's not an upgrade, but it's not a downgrade either, which is not really a bad thing given that these phones have typically had excellent speakers. Now, beneath this earpiece, we have the display, which, like I said, is 6.62 inches. It's still the same Full HD Plus E4 AMOLED panel that we've seen. It's a 10-bit panel with a 1300 net peak brightness, just like the one on the Neo 2, 120 Hz refresh. Excellent panel, and this happens to be covered by Corning's Gorilla Glass 5. Given the high peak brightness, outdoor usage was never an issue, whether I was watching movies or playing a game. This display was a pleasure to use. Talking about gaming, let's talk about the specs. Once again, similarities to the Neo 2, this is also powered by Qualcomm Snapdragon 870 SoC. Now, when we compare it to the Realme GT Neo 3, there are pros and cons. Now, the pros, this is a Qualcomm chip, so maybe there are more games that are optimized for it. But the con is that it is not as powerful a chip. The Dimensity 8100 is definitely a more powerful chip. But what Realme have done well here is the cooling. They've got their new stainless steel vapor cooling system plus, that's what they're calling it. That's basically an 8-layer heat dissipation structure that gets you great results. For example, after a 15-minute CPU throttle test, the Neo 3, it dropped down to 80% of its peak performance. The 3T, on the other hand, dropped down to only 87. But there are buts here. See the average numbers or even the minimum numbers. The Neo 3 averages 218K with a minimum of 191. The Neo 3T, on the other hand, averages 203 with a minimum of 184K. Now, yes, these are just numbers, just benchmark numbers. Don't read a lot into it and all that. Yes, true. But basically what I'm trying to convey here is, yes, the cooling is a little better on this one. The way thermals are handled is better. But given there is just so much more raw power with the Neo 3, it doesn't really make a big difference. The Neo 3 is still going to outperform the 3T with CPU, as we've seen here. Now, if you look at Antutu off the bat, the 3T takes a 10% hit on CPU and a much bigger hit with GPU. Now, once again, just to reiterate how good the cooling performance is, if you take the Neo 3, which handles thermal sweat admirably to begin with, after a 20-loop 3D Mark wildlife stress test, it's got very decent stability scores. But if you look at the Neo 3T, it's got 99% stability, which means between loop 1 and loop 20, it didn't really lose anything. So again, the best scores on the Neo 3T is about the worst scores on the Neo 3. So yes, the performance is a rung below, but they've actually done very well with cooling. Also, the 3T has LPDDR5 RAM. That's another thing. Now that said, the Neo 3 can handle games. It can handle games very well, especially titles optimized more for Qualcomm chipsets. Whatever game that I threw at it, including heavy ones like Genshin Impact, this one had no issues running it. Probably with Genshin Impact, for example, I had to get it down to medium settings, but it was able to maintain that frame rate and run smoothly. So gaming shouldn't be an issue. Now moving on to software, we've got Realme UI 3.0 built on top of Android 12. There is a lot of bloat out of the box, but once you do clean it up, user experience is fast and responsive. I'm not really gonna get into what Realme UI has to offer because we've seen a lot of that time and time again. In fact, it shares its code base with ColorOS, and we've seen a whole lot of, we've spoken a lot about these features, so I'm not really gonna bore you guys with that. What I noticed on picking this up, the X-axis linear motor, it's excellent. The haptics, the response as I was typing using the keyboard and all that, it felt really nice. Now, I was coming to this from a phone with the Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1, which is probably going to be in my next video, the Mi Mix Fold 2. So in case you don't want to miss it, if you've not subscribed yet, go chance to. Anyways, guys, coming to the GT Neo 3T, I didn't feel like I was coming to a slower phone. Basically, the Snapdragon 870 is excellent with regards to day-to-day usage. You don't feel like you're not using the latest and greatest. It's that good. The user experience, no complaints. Now moving on to cameras, for selfies, it's the same camera as its predecessors. It's a 16 megapixel f2.5. It does decently well with selfies. There's really nothing to write home about. To the back, now this is more complicated. There's a triple camera setup here. The primary is now a 64 megapixel OmniVision sensor. It's a half-inch sensor paired with an f1.8 lens, and there is no longer support for OIS. The GT Neo 3, if you remember, it had a 50 megapixel Sony IMX766 paired with an optically stabilized f1.9 lens. Now under good light, this doesn't make a lick of difference. The detail levels, as you can see here when you zoom in, or the dynamic range, they were pretty much on par. In fact, I even like the 3T's colors a little bit more. Now under low light, this is where the 3T takes an L. Now the half-inch sensor without OIS, it's just not able to compete with that sensor on the Neo 3. The IMX766, in case you don't know, it's a 1 by 1.56 inch sensor, so it's a much larger sensor. And night mode also takes a lot longer on the GT Neo 3T. So that, coupled with the lack of OIS, meant sometimes we did end up with shaky results, which never were an issue with the Neo 3. Now the Neo 3T sensor, it's even smaller than what we got on the Neo 2. Like I said, this is a half-inch sensor, while the Neo 2 had a 1 by 1.73 inch sensor. This was pretty surprising to me, even when I compared the results with the Neo 2. In many instances, like what you're seeing here, when you zoom in, you do see a difference. The Neo 2 actually outperforms the 3T. That is something I frankly did not expect. Now here's another example. So the primary camera here is definitely not an improvement on the Neo 3. Hell, it's not even an improvement on the Neo 2. Moving on, from a video perspective, we can shoot up to 4K 60 like with the other phones I've mentioned so far. Smooth, detailed footage, but if you want stabilization, you're going to have to drop down to 1080. The secondary camera is very similar to what we've seen in the past, 8 megapixel ultra wide with a 119-degree field of view. It's nothing special, and the third one, it makes up the numbers. You know, you've got a triple camera setup, 2 megapixel macro. Now before we move on to pricing, let's talk about the one area where the 3T has a noticeable upgrade from the 2, charging. The Neo 2, it got us 65 watts charging. Now here, we are getting 80 watts. So instead of full charge in 35 minutes, we now get full charge in about 30. Not a big difference. Even with top-ups, we used to get 0 to 50 in 15 minutes. Now instead, we get 0 to 50 in just 12. So guys, it's really not a big difference. If you look at, say, OnePlus, they sold 80 watt chargers for the rest of the world and 65 in the US and other markets where there was 110 volts, so because they couldn't get the technology for it, and it wasn't even seen as a big difference. It wasn't seen as a big deal. So 65 to 80, it's not really a huge deal. And the battery life itself, I would say the battery life is a little better than what I got on the Neo 3. Now that's because the Neo 3 that I was testing was the 150 watt version with a 4500 milliampere battery. So I would say compared to the Neo 2, this should perform about the same. It's been way too long since I tested the Neo 2, so I don't have exact numbers, but if I recall correctly, I'd say this performs on par to the Neo 2 with respect to battery life. So overall, the biggest thing I dislike about the 3T is the naming. T phones traditionally have been upgrades on the current numbered phones that are available. For example, OnePlus 3T or OnePlus 3. OnePlus 3T was the upgrade. Whenever we see a T added to a phone's name or an S added to a phone's name, we kind of connect it with an upgrade. But over here, the GT Neo 3T, well, the phone doesn't do anything wrong by itself. It's not an upgrade to the 3. So if you own a 3, or hell, even if you do own a GT Neo 2, this isn't a phone you should be upgrading to. Now that might seem obvious. So is this a phone worth considering or not? Well, if that's your question, the answer is it's gonna mainly depend on what they are pricing it at. Now, I don't have official pricing by the time of me shooting this video, but going by what I've heard so far, it is expected to launch at under 30,000 rupees. And initially, with the Big Billion Days sale and all that, there should be about 7,000 rupees offers available. So it should technically slot in at under 25,000. So under 30,000, I'm good. Because the GT Neo 2, if you look at it, it's currently selling for 32,000. Now let's say this has a slightly weaker primary camera, but a slightly faster charger, and you're getting that package at 2,000 rupees lesser than what the GT Neo 2 sells at, then I can see myself recommending this. Especially with the offers, if you're getting this for like 24,000 rupees, then hell yes, the GT Neo 3T is actually a good phone to consider. But if you're buying it at 32, I mean, if what I've been hearing so far turns out to be untrue, then they price it at say 32, just remove the GT Neo 2 and substitute it with this, then I wouldn't really consider it. So that's my take on the GT Neo 3T. What do you guys think about this phone? What are your thoughts? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Whatever you feel, let me know in the comments below. And with that, we are at the end of this review video. Thumbs up, thumbs down based on whatever you felt about it. Subscribe, turn on notifications, hit that bell icon if you haven't yet. And thanks a lot for your time. Thanks a lot for watching. Until next time, my name's Ash. You've been watching C4E Tech. And I'm signing off for now. You guys have a great day. Bye-bye.